The road that eats cars. The Appalachian night has a way of swallowing sound. The air is thick with pine sap and damp earth, and the mountains crouch like dark giants against the sky. The switchback curve on Route 47 looks innocent in daylight, just another sharp bend in a road carved through the ridges. But when the sun slips behind the mountains and the fog begins its slow crawl down from the tree line, the curve changes. It feels less like asphalt and gravel, and more like an open mouth waiting to be fed. Truckers have a name for it. They call it the road that eats cars. No one remembers when the first crash happened. Some old-timers at the diner claim it was back in the 30s, when a farmer's truck went off the embankment and burst into flames in the gorge below. Others insist it's older, that the accidents began around the time the mining town sprang up in the hollers. Nobody agrees on the history, but everyone agrees on the stories. They see her right before they crash. The waitress had whispered, leaning close to refill his mug of coffee. A woman in white, pale as bone, waving her arms like she's warning you. And if you see her, well, pray you keep your wheels on the blacktop. The man she was speaking to, Earl Maddox, long-haul trucker, had heard plenty of tall tales from Appalachia. Phantom hitchhikers, headless miners, demon dogs in the coal shafts. But the way the locals spoke about the switchback was different. Their voices dropped lower. Their eyes darted toward the window, like even mentioning her name might summon her. Earl stirred his coffee, letting the bitter steam fog his glasses. He'd been running routes for 20 years, all the way from Maine to Texas. He knew the weight of asphalt beneath him better than he knew his own home. But tonight, he felt a pinch of unease in his chest. "Come on now," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Road's just a road." Still, as he sat in the faded vinyl booth of the roadside diner, he couldn't ignore how the waitress had crossed herself when she spoke of the woman, or how the other drivers in the corner hushed their voices when the topic came up. Earl had stopped here before, the Rusty Fork Diner, just outside Boone Hollow. The coffee was always strong enough to strip paint, the pie stale but edible, and the locals friendly enough if you minded your manners. Tonight, though, there was a heaviness in the air, like a storm threatening but never breaking. A grizzled old man at the counter spoke up, his voice like gravel ground through a throat of rust. "Seen her myself, back in '89. Fog, so thick you could cut it with a blade. She was standing dead center in the road, waving me down. Thought she was a real woman. Maybe her car broke down. Slammed on the brakes and near jackknifed. By the time I climbed down from the cab, she was gone. Nothing but the sound of water drip in the woods." The waitress shivered, muttering, "She don't want help, Clyde. She wants company." Earl paid his bill, left a tip, and headed out into the cool mountain night. His rig, a weathered Peterbilt with fading red paint, loomed in the lot under the buzzing sodium lights. The stars were hidden tonight, smothered by low clouds that pressed against the peaks. He climbed into the cab, the familiar smell of diesel, sweat, and black coffee wrapping around him. His delivery was on the far side of the mountains, and the fastest route took him right across that cursed switchback. He'd driven it before, always in daylight, always without issue. But now it was close to midnight, and the fog was already rolling in like pale fingers reaching down the ridges. The road wound higher and higher, the headlights of his rig cutting tunnels through the mist. Pines stood sentinel on either side, their needles whispering against one another like 1,000 secrets carried on the wind. Earl tightened his grip on the wheel. The CB radio crackled, empty of chatter at this late hour. Miles passed beneath his wheels, but the stories clung to him. He thought of the waitress's pale face, of Clyde's gravelly testimony. He told himself it was nonsense, mountain folklore meant to spook out-of-towners. Yet his pulse kept a steady drumbeat in his throat. The switchback curve was coming up. He knew it by the way the road tilted, the way the guardrails bent sharply like the ribs of some giant skeleton. His headlights caught the reflective signs warning, slow, dangerous curve ahead. Earl downshifted, easing his speed. The fog thickened, swirling like smoke across the asphalt. His wipers squealed as they dragged across the damp glass. The mountains pressed close on one side, a steep drop yawning on the other. Then he saw her. At first, she was just a smear of white in the mist, a trick of the headlights. But as the truck rolled closer, the shape sharpened. A woman, standing just past the guardrail. She was barefoot, her long dress clinging to her body as though soaked in rain. Her hair hung loose, a dark curtain against her pale skin. And her arms were waving. Not frantically, not with panic, but with a strange, deliberate rhythm, almost like she was beckoning. Earl's chest went cold. His foot hovered over brake. The diner's warnings came rushing back. The stories of crashes, the whispered words. She wants company. For one dizzying moment, he considered flooring it, just blasting through, ignoring her like a mirage. But something in her eyes stopped him. They were luminous, reflecting his headlights like an animal's, yet impossibly sad. They pinned him in place. His truck slowed to a crawl. He could feel every muscle in his body straining against a decision. Then he did the one thing every local said not to do. He stopped. The Peterbilt hissed as the brakes locked, the engine idling low. The woman tilted her head, and for the briefest second, Earl thought she smiled. A small, fragile smile that made the hair on his arms rise like static. She raised one arm, extending it into the mist, pointing away from the road and into the dark embrace of the forest. And then she spoke. Her voice was thin, carried by the fog itself, but he heard it clear as glass. "Help me?" Earl swallowed hard, his throat dry. He should have thrown the truck back into gear and roared down the mountain. But something heavier than fear pinned him to the seat. Against every ounce of reason, he opened the door and stepped down into the night. The gravel crunched under his boots. The air was colder here, sharp against his skin. He glanced once at his rig, its headlights blazing against the fog like twin suns swallowed by mist. Then he turned back to her. The woman had already moved, drifting like a shadow toward the tree lean. She didn't walk so much as glide, her bare feet silent on the wet ground. She looked back once, her eyes catching his in the dark. And without fully knowing why, Earl followed. The forest closed around him, swallowing the road, the truck, and the last shred of safety. The first encounter. The forest swallowed sound like a wet blanket over a flame. Each step Earl took seemed too loud, his boots grinding the damp gravel, the crunch carrying unnaturally in the fog. The woman floated ahead of him, her thin white dress brushing against brambles that somehow never snagged her. She moved as though the woods had opened a path just for her. The glow of the truck's headlights dimmed behind him until they were nothing but a faint memory. Earl felt the weight of the night close in, pressing against his ribs like an iron band. "Miss?" he called, his voice steady but low. "You need help? You got a car broke down somewhere." The woman didn't answer. She only paused long enough to let him draw closer, then turned again, drifting deeper. Earl rubbed the back of his neck. He'd seen all kinds of strange things on the road. Drunks stumbling out of tree lean, meth heads wandering like zombies, even coyotes bold enough to stalk the edges of truck stops. But this woman, she was different. Her silence didn't feel human. It felt old. The deeper they went, the more wrong the forest became. The air was thick with damp earth and rot, but beneath that was something metallic, sharp, the smell of rusted iron. The fog pooled low to the ground, clinging to his ankles, and the trees themselves seemed to bend inward, their branches like ribs around a cage. "Where we goin'?" Earl muttered, though he wasn't sure if he wanted an answer. Finally, the woman stopped. She stood at the edge of a small clearing, pale against the black bark of the trees. Her hair hung across her face, hiding her features. Earl's breath caught when he realized the ground here wasn't just dirt. It was scarred, gouged, like the earth had been clawed by something desperate to get out. The woman turned, and at last she spoke. Not far now. Her voice was thin as spider silk, but clear. It cut through the night as though the woods had been waiting for her to speak. Earl's gut tightened. Something primal inside him screamed to turn back, to get back to his rig, to get the hell off this mountain. But he couldn't. His legs betrayed him, dragging him forward, caught in her orbit. "Not far to what?" he asked, though his throat felt tight. She lifted her arm again, pointing toward the far side of clearing. Through the fog, he saw a shape, the outline of something collapsed and half swallowed by the forest. A rusted guardrail, broken and twisted like snap bones. And just beyond it, the crumpled remains of a car. The vehicle was so old it barely looked like metal anymore. The roof caved in, the windshield a jagged grin of shattered glass. Moss crawled across the hood, trees growing up through the wheel wells. It must have been here for decades. Earl's stomach flipped. He'd heard about cars going off the switchback, sure, but seeing one rotting here in the woods brought the stories to life in a way no diner gossip ever could. The woman drifted closer to the wreck, her dress dragging across the moss. She laid her hand gently on the roof of the car, as though caressing the remains of something once beloved. "My car," she whispered. The words made Earl's skin crawl. He looked at the rust, the decay, the decades of moss. She couldn't have been alive when this went off the road. And yet here she was, pale and breathing, if she was breathing at all. "Miss," he began carefully, his voice catching. "That ain't possible. This thing's been here longer than you've been alive." At that, she turned toward him. For the first time, her face was clear. Her eyes were not just sad. They were endless, pools of gray, swirling like storm clouds, pulling him into a horizon that had no end. Her lips parted in the faintest of smiles, but there was no warmth in it. "I never left," she said. The clearing fell silent. No crickets, no wind, just her words echoing in his skull. Earl stumbled back a step, heart hammering. The smell of iron was stronger now, cloying in his nostrils. He glanced down and froze. The ground around the car wasn't just scarred. It was littered with wreckage, bits of chrome, scraps of fabric, pieces of glass glinting faintly in the mist. More than one vehicle had gone off the road here. More than one family had been swallowed by the woods. Earl's breath came shallow, ragged. His instinct screamed to run, to tear back to the forest and never look over his shoulder. But when he tried to move, he found himself rooted, his boots heavy as anchors. The woman tilted her head, watching him with that same sad, endless gaze. Then she stepped closer. The air grew colder with every inch she closed between them. "You stop," she whispered. "Most don't. They swerve, they crash, they break. But you stopped. You came to me." Earl's lips were dry. "I thought you needed help." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. Hunger disguised as grief. "I do," she said softly. "I always do." She raised her hand, her fingers pale and delicate, and touched his arm. The contact was light as frost, but it burned through his sleeve, searing him to the bone. Earl gasped, jerking back, but her grip tightened with unnatural strength. The forest seemed to lean in, branches creaking, the fog coiling tighter around them. Earl's vision blurred at the edges, like the night itself was pulling him down into some deep current. The woman leaned close, her voice brushing his ear like a dying breath. "Stay with me?" Earl's chest seized. His mind screamed no, but something in his blood screamed yes. For the first time in 20 years behind the wheel, Earl Maddox, the man who never stopped for anything, felt completely out of control. The lure of the dead. Earl fought against her grip, but it was like trying to pull free from iron. Her hand looked frail, bone-thin, the skin almost translucent, yet held him with the weight of the mountain itself. "Let me go," he growled, his voice hoarse, but the plea carried no force. The fog swallowed the sound whole. Her eyes never left his. Gray storms churning, sorrow carved into every line of her pale face. But behind the sorrow there was something else, something vast, a hunger so patient and endless it made his stomach turn. "You've driven so far," she whispered, "so long on empty roads. Don't you ever get tired of leaving? Don't you want to stay?" Earl clenched his jaw, shaking his head, but the words sank into him, heavy as wet wool. He thought of the miles behind him, the countless nights of headlights on blacktop, the loneliness that sat in the passenger seat mile after mile. She was cutting into that hollow space in him, finding the weak seam. Her grip tightened, and Earl gasped. Images flared behind his eyes, not his own memories, but fragments that weren't his at all. A young man in a Letterman jacket, hands trembling as he wrestled a wheel that wouldn't turn. A mother clutching her child, the windshield exploding into shards of glass. A miner, face streaked with cold dust, screaming as fire swallowed his cab. one after another. Faces of the dead flashed through him, each snuffed out on this cursed bend of road. The woman's voice wrapped around the visions. They came to me too. They all stopped sooner or later. The road feeds, and I lead them home. Earl staggered, knees buckling. He tore his arm free with a wrenching effort, stumbling back until his shoulders struck a tree. Bart dug into his jacket, grounding him for a fleeting second. "What the hell are you?" he rasped. The woman blinked, tilting her head in a slow, unnatural motion. "Once I was like you. Flesh, blood, bone. A bride. I wore white then, too. The mountain took me, and I stayed. Now I bring the others. I keep the road full." Her smile was paper-thin, sorrow carved into its corners. "I am the keeper of the switchback." Earl's skin prickled cold. He looked past her to the wreckage in the clearing. The rusted car she touched wasn't alone. Shapes stirred in the fog. More wrecks. A dozen at least, half swallowed by moss and vines. Chrome bumpers like crooked teeth, broken glass glittering like ice. And among the wrecks, shadows moved. Figures, faint and flickering, like smoke caught in the headlights of memory. Men, women, children. Their forms broken, twisted in ways no body should be. Hollow eyes locked on him. Silent mouths moved without sound. The fog thickened, curling around his boots like grasping fingers. Earl's chest heaved. He was surrounded by the lost, the dead, the ones she'd lured here across the decades. Their faces blurred together, a gallery of every cautionary tale ever whispered at a diner table. The woman reached for him again. "You can stay. You don't have to run the blacktop anymore. No more miles, no more empty nights. Just rest." Her words were honey laced with rot. Earl's vision swam. Part of him longed to collapse into her arms, to let go of the endless miles of the ache of solitude, to stop moving for once in his life. But another part, the stubborn steel spine part that kept him alive through snowstorms, jackknives, and 20-hour hauls, screamed to fight. "I ain't yours," he hissed through clenched teeth. "I don't belong to this road." The woman's face flickered, grief sharpening into something sharper. Not rage, disappointment, as if he'd failed some unspoken test. "You stopped," she said again, but this time her voice was colder. Stopping means choosing. The shadows around the wreck stirred, shifting closer. The dead were circling, closing ranks. Earl's heart slammed against his ribs. He scanned the trees, searching for any gap, any escape. His eyes snagged on a shape half hidden in the brush. Another car wreck. It had torn open like a wound. But unlike the others, this one wasn't rusted through. Its headlights were shattered, but the glass still clung sharp in the sockets. The metal was dented, but not yet moss-covered. It was newer, maybe only a year old. And beside it, barely visible in the fog, was a body. Earl's stomach twisted, bowel rising. A man lay sprawled against the wheel, his face slack and pale, eyes wide and glassy. Blood blackened the collar of his shirt. Earl recognized the reflective vest. A fellow trucker. The man must have gone off the road not long ago. The forest reeked of blood now, the metallic tang overwhelming. Earl gagged, covering his mouth, but his eyes stayed fixed on that body. It was proof. Proof this wasn't just visions, wasn't just folklore spun at a counter. The road really had eaten him alive. The woman followed his gaze, her own eyes softening. She crouched beside the corpse, fingers brushing the man's cheek like a lover waking someone from sleep. He was kind. He didn't want to go, but he came with me anyway. They always do. Her gaze lifted back to Earl, heavy with expectation. "You will too." The shadows pressed closer, whispering now. Not words, but the susurrus of rustling leaves, of tires hissing on wet pavement, the language of accidents, the song of the road. Earl's lungs burned. His hands shook. For the first time, he thought he might not make it out of this mountain alive. But somewhere deep inside, the part of him that had seen countless dawns in the cab of the truck sparked. He wasn't ready to give the road his body. Not yet. "No," he growled, his voice low but steady. "Not me. Not tonight." The woman rose slowly, her pale dress whispering against the moss. Her eyes were endless storms. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She only said, with a grief that chilled him to the marrow. Then the road will take you anyway. The shadows lunged. The switchback's keeper. The dead surged forward, their movements jerky, like marionettes yanked by unseen strings. Earl staggered back, lungs burning as the fog wrapped tighter around him. Faces flickered through the mist. Hollow-eyed children, broken-jawed truckers, women with glass glittering in their hair. Their mouths opened in unison, exhaling the stench of rust and rot. Earl's boots slipped in the damp moss as he shoved himself off the tree. His pulse thundered in his ears. "No!" He rasped, forcing his legs into motion. He barreled to the shadows, arms shielding his face, his body braced for impact, but they passed through him like smoke, icy and suffocating. Their touch leached warm from his skin, each brush a reminder of the grave. Behind him, the woman's voice rang soft but sharp as broken glass. "You can't leave. You chose to stop. The road has you now." Her words carried like a church bell in fog, each syllable vibrating inside his chest. He sprinted toward the faint glow of his truck's headlights, dim through the trees. Every step felt heavier, as though the earth itself clutched his ankles. The whispers chased him, voices braiding together into a single plea. "Stay, stay, stay." Earl broke through the tree-line, his rig a hulking shadow in the mist. Relief flared in his chest, until he saw her standing between him and the cab. The woman, waiting. Her dress rippled though there was no wind, her hair floating like it was submerged in water. She didn't move to block him, didn't raise a hand. She simply watched, and in her gray eyes Earl saw a century of accidents replaying. Metal twisting, glass shattering, bodies crumpling. The road feeding, always feeding. He skidded to a halt, panting. "Why me?" he demanded, voice raw. "You got plenty of bodies here. Why the hell me?" Her head tilted slowly, bird-like. "Because you stopped. You listened. And because you're tired. I smell it on you. The miles. The loneliness. You carry it like a coffin." Earl's jaw clenched. He thought of the long stretches of highway, the empty diners at 3 a.m., the way silence filled the cab until it felt like a weight pressing on his chest. She wasn't wrong. But she wasn't right, either. "That don't mean I'm ready to lay down and die," he spat. For the first time, her expression cracked. Not anger, sorrow. A deep, infinite sorrow that made his heart seize. "I wasn't ready either." The fog shifted, and for an instant Earl saw her differently. Not a ghostly figure, but a young woman in an old wedding dress, lace brown with age, eyes brimming with tears. A car overturned behind her, the wheels still spinning, blood dripping from the hood. He saw her hand outstretched, begging for help that never came. Then the vision shattered, and she was the pale specter again. "I waited," she whispered. "No one came. So I stay and I keep the road fed. If it ever empties, I vanish. Forgotten. That cannot happen." Earl's chest tightened. He understood now. She wasn't just luring victims. She was chained here, bound to keep the curse alive or be erased. Her eternity depended on the wreckage of others. And now she wanted him to join her. The whispers grew louder, the shadows pressing in. Earl's options collapsed like the walls of a trap. He could give in, let her claim him, become another ghost in the fog. Or he could fight, though fighting meant defying something older than the mountain itself. His eyes darted to the cab of his truck. The headlights burned faintly, the only anchor the real world left. If he could reach it, maybe he could break free. He took a step forward. The woman's eyes hardened, storm clouds darkening to iron. "If you leave, the road will hunger. It will take another, maybe a family, maybe a child. Their blood will be on your hands." The word struck like a hammer. Earl froze. He pictured it. A minivan rounding the switchback, headlights cutting the fog, children in the back seat, her pale figure waving, luring. Screams, shattering glass, the mountain feeding again. His hands trembled, his choices sharpened to a razor's edge. Die here, and the road's hunger, or live, and let the curse take someone else. The fog pressed closer, the dead whispering in his ears, their cold breath crawling down his spine. The woman reached out her hand, tender as a bride at an altar. "Stay, Earl. And the miles. And the hunger." He stared at her hand, then at his truck, at the two paths before him, and then Earl Maddox, who had never stopped for anything in 20 years, made his choice. If he stayed, he took her hand. Her grip was icy, but the sorrow in her eyes softened. The whispers fell silent, the shadows fading into the mist. Earl felt his body unravel, the weight of miles dissolving as the mountain embraced him. His truck headlights blinked out. By morning, the switchback had claimed another driver, but no one ever found a body. The woman smiled through her tears. She was not forgotten. The road was fed. If he ran, he tore past her, sprinting for cab. Her scream split the fog, raw and inhuman, rattling the trees. The dead surged, clawing at his arms and legs, but adrenaline drove him. He slammed into the driver's seat, twisted the key, and the Peterbilt roared alive. The headlights burned brighter, cutting the fog. The woman shrieked, her form unraveling into mist. Earl floored the accelerator, the rig thundering down the mountain, tires screaming on wet asphalt. In the rear-view mirror, he saw her one last time, standing in the switchback, her arms outstretched, sorrow etched into every line of her face. The road hadn't claimed him, but he knew it would claim someone else. The hunger wasn't gone, just postponed. Epilogue. Weeks later, Earl sat in another diner, hundreds of miles away. He nursed a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. The waitress asked if he was okay. He didn't answer, because no matter how many miles he put behind him, he could still smell the iron in the fog. He could still hear the whispers. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he saw the woman in white at the switchback, waiting, always waiting.